Carallo began his mafia career in the Lucchese family stronghold, the Garment District. By the 1950s, he was one of the biggest labor racketeers in the country. He and an associate allegedly put into power the most infamous union boss of all time, James Hoffa.
It is a complex area, and a lot of traditional organized crime groups really didn't know how to exploit it. Tony Ducks Carallo, Johnny Diaguardi did. Johnny Dio was the individual who created the paper locals in the Teamsters Union, which enabled Jimmy Hoffa to become the president. Tony Ducks Carallo played a menacing role within the area of labor racketeering.
Former FBI agent Jules Bonavolante was also familiar with Carallo.
I think if you go back to the McClellan hearings years ago, Senator McClellan himself said that Tony Ducks Carallo was one of the worst racketeers he'd ever seen. In fact, he said that either he or Robert Kennedy stated that Carallo had helped Jimmy Hoffa gain control of the union in New York.
The authorities were unable to prove Carallo's role in labor corruption. Instead, when he was convicted in the 60s, it was for bribery. The brief jail sentence only delayed Carallo's appointment as boss. The commission named an interim head, Carmine Tremonti, to run the family while Carallo served his time. After 23 months, Tony Ducks was out, assuming his position at the top of the Lucchese crime family. Under Carallo's reign as boss, the Lucchese family expanded operations in New York's Long Island. Carallo continued the family takeover of the suburban construction and garbage hauling industries, and appointed Sal Avellino as the family's point person in sanitation.
Well, Avellino's family had been in the Lucchese crime family. His father had been a soldier in the family. His father had interest in the carting industry. He took them over. And he was an extraordinarily good businessman. It was easy for him, I suppose, because he operated on the wrong side of the law. But he knew how to conduct his businesses, how to conduct the unions, how to conduct the trade association in a way in which would guarantee the mob the greatest amount of money.
With big earners such as Avellino under his command, Carallo was proving to be a worthy successor as boss of the Lucchese family. For a while, there seemed to be no end to the river of cash. Tony Ducks and his associates were already in the sights of the law, however. After the eye-opening testimony of Joseph Valachi, war on the Mafia became a top priority for law enforcement. And yet guys at the top like Carallo felt no fear. The authorities were learning that traditional methods of fighting crime had no long-lasting impact on the mob. For decades, gangsters operated with virtual impunity. On a local level, law enforcement was corrupt from top to bottom. At the national level, a limited war was fought by the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, while the FBI, under the rule of J. Edgar Hoover, officially said there was no mob.
For a long time, until he was embarrassed into admitting the existence of organized crime, Mr. Hoover refused to admit even the existence of organized crime.
Various explanations for Hoover's position include persistent rumors of a secret personal life, and that the mob threatened to expose his lifestyle. For sure, Hoover was more interested in wars he could win for the benefit of the media. He was preoccupied with high-profile bank robbers and became obsessed with rooting out communists.
The Communist Party of the United States is a fifth column, if there ever was one. It is far better organized than were the Nazis in occupied countries prior to their capitulation. They are seeking to weaken America, just as they did in their era of obstruction when they were aligned with the Nazis. Their goal is...
Charging a person with being a member of a mafia family was unheard of because of the difficulty the government would have in trying to prove that. They didn't have the inside witnesses. They didn't have the tape recordings of discussions between members of the mafia who would recite the names of the families or the leadership, who they might be, or the positions held by this guy and that guy. That came later.
Hard jail time was the furthest thing from the minds of the wise guys, but that too was about to change. After years of operating independently, local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies began cooperating. Ronald Goldstock headed the New York State Organized Crime Task Force in the 80s.
For a period of time, law enforcement had been fighting a war of attrition. Individuals were arrested and indicted for specific crimes. They may be put in prison. Generally, they were out after a relatively short period of time.
The FBI found it a frustrating experience.
We would find a witness. We would develop evidence about the crime. We would arrest the extortionist, and we put them in jail. No matter how many we arrested, as we like to say, there was always 100 in line to take their place.
One thing law enforcement knew was that often mob-related murders occurred with no witnesses or with witnesses who were themselves mobsters and not likely to speak to the authorities. When a member of a gang was killed, it usually sent a message to the others to keep quiet.
That all changed with the RICO statute and electronic surveillance in 1968 and 1970, and other methods of dealing with problems of organized crime where you could look at them as groups of individuals committing patterns of criminal activity.
Greg O'Connell and other prosecutors recognized the importance of the RICO statute.
The racketeering statute was a brilliant invention which enabled the government to charge not just a specific isolated offense of larceny or an arson or a payoff or a bribe or a murder in isolation, which is the way the country operated up until that time. What this offense allowed was the prosecution of an actual organization.
You really can't catch the leaders of organized crime on the streets. That's not where they are. Where they are is in social clubs or in restaurants, planning the activities that the soldiers and the captains are going to carry out.
We would plant mics in clubs, in bars, in restaurants, in homes, in different rooms. We would bug telephones, all by court order.
One of the things we were looking to do was to use the RICO statute to indict the commission, the heads of the 5 New York crime families. The Organized Crime Task Force had extraordinary information as to the Lucchese family and some evidence as to the heads of 1 or 2 others. The FBI had bugs in on the heads of 3 families at the time. And so if you combine the 2, there was a mountain of evidence that could be used to indict and convict all of the family bosses.
The New York City Police Department and the FBI began working together with a common goal. Rich Sita was a New York detective on mob duty.
At this point, a marriage was made, if you will, between the FBI and the New York City Police Department Organized Crime Investigation Division, where a commitment of detectives were assigned to FBI squads. And those squads were dedicated to investigations, proactive investigations into organized crime families in the New York City area.
I personally don't believe we could have done the job that we did without the help and assistance of the New York City Police Department. They had an ability to do things from their days on the street as cops and their experience that we could not do. We as agents could not do. We complemented each other beautifully, and it couldn't have been a better match. And without them, as I say, we would have never succeeded as well as we did.
One of the most significant achievements of the joint effort was the planting of a bug in the Jaguar belonging to Lucchese capo Sal Avellino. Investigators learned that Tony Ducks routinely rode with Avellino to discuss Mafia business.
Why we only got 150 trucks running when we used to have 300 trucks running, Sal?
They got half of that on the other side, Tony. I mean, come on, we're doing the best we can. Busting my chops here.
Yeah, well, this is our bread and butter, you know that. I want to keep it that way. This is the business that brings in most of the money.
They knew the car would be the key to their investigation. But planning a bug in the mobile Lucchese headquarters was not going to be easy. The car was constantly garaged at Sal Avellino's home. When parked away from home, it was never left unattended. And when being driven, Avellino drove deliberately circuitous routes to throw off any would-be tails.